My name's James Warren, and I am really excited to be joined by my friend Christy Tyndall to explore how we ask different and better questions. And all I can say is she'll tell you more about her background, but given Christy's background and her journey, I've no doubt this is going to be a really interesting and fascinating conversation. First for us, but definitely for any of you who are watching and listening. So, before I say a little bit more about me, Christy, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Thank you. Thank you, James, for that welcome. And I'm so excited to engage in this conversation with you today. As James mentioned, my name is Christy Tyndall. I'm an associate professor in the VCU Honors College, and I am a lifelong student of psychology. I started studying psychology as a junior in high school and fell in love. And so I've worked in counseling, I've been in teaching for the past 20 years. And throughout my time as a psychologist and as a professor, asking questions is such a crucial part of all of the roles that I have ever assumed and embraced throughout my career. So asking questions and not just asking them myself, but also teaching students how to ask questions as they go about their daily lives, as they go about their studies and their future goals.
Why does I definitely want to unpack that before I say a little bit more. Just tell me real quick why why does the question matter so much to you?
I was thinking this through this morning, and I was thinking about my journey as a professor specifically. So I've been a faculty member for 20 years. And when I first started teaching, I thought it was about, imparting knowledge,
Mhm.
teaching content. But as I've grown and as I've matured as an instructor, it just has become so clear to me that the art of teaching is not in imparting the wisdom, teaching the content, it's in teaching students to question.
Mm.
And the reason we need to focus on the question is to be able to analyze the information that we are consuming, whether that be from academia or general social media or wherever. But asking these questions helps us to, number one,
Mm.
reveal truths for us. And it also helps us to connect with one another. So that's a whole nother vein.
Yeah.
Uh, but I feel like every time you ask a question, I'm just going deeper and deeper into other ways
Well,
we should be questioning.
no. This is great because I think you just highlighted the big synergy, especially between you and me. And I'll say a quick beat about that, and then I want to go right back into your point.
Mhm.
Um, so partly the reason why we connected and started having these conversations is, I lead Share More Stories, which is a human experience research company, and we use storytelling and really questions in the form of prompts to get people to think about and reflect on their experience, to sort of ask themselves those critical questions that you just described. And I think as I've done that work and learned about, as you put it, the value or the importance of the question, it's really helped us help people go deeper into their own experiences. And so you're exactly right. I don't see myself in that role as, yeah, there's a little bit of like, here's how to think about your story and experience, and here's some tips and tools. But what I share in that context is this compared to what they learn from just investigating their own lived experience versus being passive in their own life, being active and questioning and curious about their own life. Um, all the amazing stories come out of that. And they don't have to be a storyteller or a writer or anything like that to get really deep, meaningful lessons from their own stories. And then that opens us up to learn from each other. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. I think part of the human existence, which we're missing a little bit, is I don't have to experience everything to make sense of my life. Like that's why you share your experiences with me because there's lessons in them. And I literally can't try everything. And I might, if I listen to other people, I might decide I don't need to try that because that might be unsafe or that might be dangerous or that might just be, something I'm interested in. And so I think the question also helps us get to as you put it, connection, because it helps us surface things that actually we find out got that in common with this person, or there's a similarity. So I'm curious, given that role of the question and what I do, and what you're finding out in the classroom, what does that prompt for you in terms of added kind of reflection?
Sure. The class that I was thinking of as you were talking is I teach well-being. I teach the applied psychology of well-being.
Hmm.
It's a positive psychology course. It's one that I've developed, and over the course of a semester, we take a journey into personal well-being. And to your point about not knowing all the answers, right? I can share with students what research has indicated about well-being, but really the point of the class is to guide students on their own journey and to teach students to ask questions about their own experience, about their own well-being, and how they can take what we're learning in the classroom, both from content, from other researchers, as well as, back to your point about connection, from each other. What can we learn about those things? And by questioning our own well being, our own experiences, how can we apply what we're learning in a meaningful way to promote personal well being and flourishing?
So when I met you, um, you were I think you were teaching a class in research at that time, right? And
Yes.
it was also in the VCU Honors College, and you were teaching students about, I think, especially, maybe not only, but especially qualitative research methodology. What When you zoom out and you think about when you're teaching those students about how to conduct inquiry, and now you're talking about this well-being class and you're teaching students how to reflect on their own well-being, what's same about those and what's different,
Mm.
especially
And
when it comes to like the question?
yes. Well, both have the common kernel of questioning, right? Of questioning research. In the well-being class, we read primary research conducted by the leading psychologists, in the field. But it's a relatively young field in psychology, and yes, there are voices present in that research, but there are voices absent from that research.
Hmm.
Not all of the lessons that we learn are applicable to every student, given their experiences, given culture, given so many different individual variables. So again, the key here is the questioning piece and the questioning of research. But back to the class that we originally connected on with the qualitative research, that's very similar because we are trying to get at individuals' lived experiences,
Yes.
right? Through questioning, through qualitative questioning, through stories.
Yeah.
And in the qualitative class, that's much more focused on the methodology, right? And the art and the science of asking those questions. They both have a lot of similarities, but diverge in the purpose.
So I love everything you just said, especially when you just commented on, the idea of there being art and science in our questioning,
Mm,
because that takes me so many different places. A lot of what I try to help some of the folks we work with do is realize that some of these questions do feel more quote unquote scientific, because they are designed to elicit a quantitative set of responses that you can measure and project and do these things with, and that definitely engages the sort of intellectual rational part of our brain. But also some of the questions that we ask are quite artful in their intentionality. We're trying to get people to reflect not just on their own lived experience, but the emotional aspects of that experience. What do they remember feeling in that experience? What do they remember sensory, tasting, touching, smelling, hearing? Because when we ask them those things, it seems to elicit that memory in richer detail and kind of bring it up to the surface, and then they can express it. And I'm so often guided by this quote from Dr. Maya Angelou that says, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." And so that really has been like the touchstone for a lot of what we do, because there's all these experiences and stories that are kind of wrapped up, and some of them are might be traumatic, some of them might not be, but they're all sort of there. And the question is, when there's stories or questions and answers that need to come up and out, we have to help people sometimes get them out. And sometimes what I've learned is that untold story that the person is having a hard time surfacing. It's because they're not being prompted in a way that brings it up and out. They're not being asked questions that help them explore their own experience, which kind of brings me to a question for you. If you had to tell us, like, right off the bat, in your mind, what makes a good question and what makes a bad question?
Mm. Well, I think, well, number one, not asking a question, right?
Right,
Assuming.
right.
That's
That's the
that's the
worst
first one.
question.
Is the unasked question,
Hmm,
is just going off of one's assumptions, right? Oh, this is the reason this person's acting this way, or this is the reason this person is not purchasing my product. So I think the worst question is the unasked
hmm.
question.
I love that.
One of the things I work with my students is realizing that all research and all question contain some bias, right? They all come from somewhere. Research comes from a point of view, right? And individuals' beliefs, experiences, biases influence the questions that are asked,
Hmm,
right? They influence who they're asking the questions to. So, in addition to the unasked questions, I think the unexamined question,
hmm,
right? So we need to look at all aspects of the questions. You mentioned prompting. I mean, that's therein lies such a key to what I'm trying to shift my education to, the art of prompting.
hmm.
Right. And we think of it in, of course, I think of it in terms of qualitative research, the research questions, the interview questions, but prompting when it comes to AI.
Yes.
I mean, this is changing the way we ask questions and certainly changing the answers that we get. But I think that it should be drawing us even closer and more more intimately acquainted with our process of asking questions.
Hmm. So I think a few things on that, and I definitely want to spend some time on the AI piece, because that is one where I can just look at my own experience over the past 2 years and how my prompts have changed and where I'm going back to, which is trying to be both stubbornly and intentionally as human as I can in that process, to almost force it to conform to a more human way of thinking about this, which we could probably spend a whole lot of time talking about. Um, when you talk about the unasked question, that is such a frame for how we think about human engagement, right? And that's what all of this comes down to for me, whether we're talking about research with an N of 10,000 or we're talking about an in-depth interview. It's this, there's still, I'm asking you a question that I want to know the answer to. And all of those biases you just talked about, all of those preconditions you just talked about, what I try to get myself in the mindset of and help others think about is bring it down to two humans having a conversation. Forget the scale question. Just bring it down to two. You want to learn something from and about this person. So the first question I ask myself is, what is our motive for learning? Am I learning to strengthen, to engage, to connect, to deliver and make better? Or am I learning to satisfy something that is somewhat fairly limited in me or in the organization or in the brand? And so, what I would say are expansive opening questions that seek opportunity spaces, seek new ideas, get people in a growth mindset where they're actually exploring possibilities, versus a limited frame where they are reinforcing preconceived doubts or preconceived beliefs, or just reinforcing what they already know and not really expanding what's possible. And so I think there's so much about each other that we don't actually know. And so the question for me is, how do I get to know a person? I ask them questions. And if I ask them open ended questions, they have more to say. If I ask them a lot of yes no questions, I get what I asked for. And so a lot of our work with the people that we are engaging in research, more on like our client side, is getting them to spend everything you just said, more time thinking about the question that they want to know. Because what we have found is they go into these things really thinking, I know this, and this. So I want to ask about those things. And we say, well, you should really want to ask about the things you don't know much about. And that makes them nervous. And he said, but that's where your wisdom is coming from, is when I ask this person to tell me what they want to tell me instead of what I want to know more about, I get a very different answer. Have you experienced anything like that in your work?
Yes, and yes, leading questions, right? Or
Yeah,
as
okay.
you
Yeah.
indicated, questions that are confirming what I already know. It's like, "All right, tell me your thoughts on peas as a vegetable," or "Why why are peas the worst vegetable?" Those are 2 very different questions, right? "Tell me about your experience with this," or "Why is this the absolute worst thing ever?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a leading question. That's a bias embedded in that question. So to your point of truly opening up those questions, making sure bias is not embedded, making sure judgment is not embedded to try to get at that deeper experience. And that's why earlier you were talking about questions that get individuals into the moment, into the experience. I call those the think, feel, do questions.
Yes.
In that moment when you were having that experience, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were you doing? Bring me into this space,
Yes.
right? Those are the types of questions that can bring us to that place of deeper connection and understanding.
I love that because I think so much of what we're dealing with in our day-to-day lives, especially in the current world we live in that is so technology driven. We keep telling ourselves, I feel like we're living in self-fulfilling prophecies. We say attention spans are shorter, so then we make shorter things, and then we say, hey, the attention span is even shorter, and then we make more shorter things. And so I feel like we have to almost tap the brakes on that and say the human, which didn't just suddenly evolve in the last 10 years because of social and digital, the human still has this deep-seated desire to connect. Most of us do, at least. We have this deep seated desire to be seen and heard and understood. And while we may build up sort of artifices of things that either convince us we don't need that or that compensate for the lack of that, I see it all the time. You take people who maybe project a wall of disconnection or even disengagement, and when you ask them the right question, they open up. And sometimes in very surprised, like my biases have gotten challenged many times because I will assume somebody in the class or the workshop is not vibing with this process, and then when it's their turn to share, they blow me away. And so I'm constantly reminding myself, James, eat your own cooking. The things that you are asking of people to do to suspend their disbelief or presumption about other people, even when I'm doing this in what I think is a pretty open and inclusive way, I find myself sometimes slipping into the same habit.
Mm. And how do you respond in those moments?
Well, what I try to do is I try to catch it when I can. If I don't catch it, I realize that the person is in real time sometimes shifting my point of view, and I welcome that. I've trained myself as much as I can as part of my light job. So I've trained myself to be open to surprises, to sometimes even seek the surprises out. I had a this sort of a corporate innovation class we were taking, and our faculty, our professor, said the best insights are obvious once you hear them, once you see them. And so I look for those, oh, now this is obvious moments about myself, about the person that is sharing their story, about the group, because those feel like deeper wisdom to me. And everything doesn't have to be super, super deep, but I'm just not motivated by shallow. I'm not motivated by surface. I'm much more motivated by going deep. So when somebody, not intentionally, but just by telling their story, reminds me, yep, James, you have a preconceived notion too. I sometimes, if I'm facilitating, I hook onto that as a way of seeing. I kind of ask very consciously, does anybody else relate to what this person just shared? And invariably, the answer is absolutely. Somebody else will chime in and say, yeah, I totally get that. I totally relate to that. Even if the circumstances or logistics are not the same, which I think goes back to something you said earlier, there is this ability to connect if we open ourselves and if we ask different questions and we open ourselves to answering those questions, we can find pathways to connection that maybe are harder to see in our day-to-day surface level go existence.
Mhm. Yeah. And those moments that you describe, they're not always easy,
No.
right? those moments that call into question, maybe our own beliefs and our own things that we know, right? So to remain open, in
Yeah.
those moments, as you have described, is such a beautiful and powerful, yet can be an uncomfortable thing. Uh,
I think I don't know if this is true for lots of people. Um, I do think I'm so deeply interested in helping people explore their experiences. I've started to realize some of that motivation, some of that inclination comes from me deeply wanting to make sense of my own experiences. So I do think I approach it maybe with intentional empathy, if that makes sense, where I'm desiring to connect with people. I'm desiring to learn from people. Even when I don't get it quite right, I do think I'm able to fall back relatively quickly on like, well, my intention was to make this space available, whether it's in a room or online. So let me just go back to my intention. And when I get back to my intention, that is my like in real time course correction. But it's also when we're looking at the project and the analysis, I always keep going back to what was our intention? What did we seek to learn from this exploration? And are we learning it? Did we ask questions that allow us to learn it? Or can we go back and ask different questions, which we do sometimes in our research? We will go back and ask different questions of the stories, which gets really, really fun, which is also back to prompting because it we do a lot of our analysis using AI tools, and how we prompt has a lot to do with what we can learn from the experiences.
mhm. I will just add on with another class that I teach and reflecting back on my teaching in general and
Yeah,
bringing it back to everything that you were talking about before
yeah,
we go to the AI. Um, I think as an instructor, as I reflect on the past 20 years, what I have learned from the students,
yes,
again, from day one as a faculty, I'm the one that needs to be imparting knowledge. I need to be the one sharing content. But as I reflect back, what I have learned from the students and how they have challenged and my worldview has grown and transformed in response to students' experiences
yes,
has really, truly been a gift of being an educator and being an educator in this space where I can ask these questions of students and learn from them and learn from their experiences as well.
mm. So being open to learning the things we don't yet know. I mean, I think that's the journey, right? That's the curiosity in real time, and it shows in your approach to both teaching and learning, which I think is beautiful. Let's talk about AI a bit because I think you've got some I think you've got some interest in that space. I know we do. I think you've got some curiosity, and it sounds like you're investigating it with your students and others. So well, I guess we'll start off with big picture. Like, what's your take on how we use AI today for research, for and what type of research are you finding it more useful for or less useful for, or just high level, what are you doing with your students and yourself to use AI to help learn?
Mm. Well, I think as educators and in a higher ed space, all of us need to be thinking about AI.
Yeah,
We need to be thinking about this is a transformational tool, transforming the way individuals consume information, find information, and communicate information. It's transformative. We cannot ignore it. We cannot say, "No, I prohibit the use of AI." And in fact, I've been to some of these professional conferences here in our local area, AI conferences, tech conferences, talking with business leaders. Business leaders do not want recent college graduates coming out and saying, "Nope, I've never used AI." No, we need to be teaching
yeah,
individuals how to use AI and how to question. So that's where I am right now. This is it's a new space. It's a space I'm navigating personally in using AI in my own life to improve some productivity in some areas, and to be able to communicate with students and teach responsible use of
yeah,
AI, and questioning on all ends. Number one, asking questions, prompting, information, generating information, and number two, most importantly, information literacy, questioning that information that is generated, right? Not just saying, "Yep, this is what it has been generated. This is what I'm accepting," but questioning that information that's been generated. So it's a big deal.
It's huge, and that questioning the information is, I think at first it feels to people like, well, why would I have to do that if it's AI? And the answer is because AI today is still in the early days, is reflective of human biases. It's reflective of the vast amounts of human generated information, and it is ingesting and reasoning and processing that information in real time and making a judgment on, I think this is not only what you mean, but I also think this is what this information has to say about what you mean. And there can be errors in that. There not can be. There are errors in that.
There.
And so, I've learned how to write follow up questions and prompts that force it to double check itself, force it to consider its source, force it to, you know, did you interpret my direction generally or literally? And it reminds me that in human communication, and I don't know if this is where AI today, maybe this won't be true in 6 months or a year, but today still falls short. I realize that I'm a remarkably inconsistent person. I My intention in a question, the same question varies. I might ask the question one day because I've had a lot of time to think about it, very, very specifically and literally and structured. And then the next day I might ask it very quickly and hurriedly and conversationally. And then I will wonder why I didn't get a similar type of response because it does not know my mood is different. It does not know that I'm rushing. It might make some inference over time, like, oh, this very conversational question from the same person I should treat as how this person communicates with me. But that's stuff that we do with each other in a millisecond. We process the facial expression, the conversation, our memory of our interaction with that person, the context of the discussion in the moment, and we read each other, the context of our questions and answers with each other as much as what you're actually saying. And I think that's a space where AI I'm positive the scientists and engineers are working very, very quickly on that, especially in some of the humanoid applications. I think generative AI in chat-based tools like ChatGPT, that's where I think they still have work to do. But I think that's what we have to explain to people without everybody trying to go get a data science degree. We have to explain to people like, well, what's at a high level, what's happening behind the scenes enough so you understand how to interpret the result you're getting. Are you finding like when you're having these conversations with your students, are you teaching them also on not just how to ask their questions and how to question the answers they get? Are they curious about how it even produces those answers, or are they taking it more or
Mm,
less at its value?
mm. Well, there's probably not probably, there is a wide variation of attitudes depending on um, discipline,
Okay.
right? Disciplinary specific interests. For instance, if I have a computer science student, their motivations and their levels of inquiry there are going to be different than a non-computer science type student. But for the most part, I just see not necessarily interested in the inner machinations, but more the input output
Hmm.
levels.
Hmm.
Mm. But it's just interesting because especially in qualitative research and in asking the questions, different experts that I've been listening to say AI and generative AI can be very good in spaces where people already know something about something,
Yes.
already have some level of base knowledge and or expertise. And so if I'm trying to teach students how to ask questions in a qualitative class, I'm trying to teach students how to ask questions and how to get at those stories, right? Bringing it back to the experiences and to the stories. If they don't have this base knowledge of this is the type of question that I ask, this is the type of information that I get back, if they're just relying on AI to pull out some of these stories, there's a space there, there's a skill set that's missing.
Yes.
Right. And so my question for you, I know with some of the work that you do, you're bridging this gap
Yes.
between AIs and stories, right? This missing piece that I'm talking about. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think the baseline knowledge is key, and I think that's true for anything we're talking about. If I don't have a baseline knowledge, say in just the basics of concrete and cement, and I go to the store and I don't ask anybody for help. I just go to the shelf that
Mhm.
has bags of, and they're different, by the way. I don't remember the difference, but I know that they're different. They're technically different. One is pre-mixed and one is an ingredient in a different mixture. And if I just go to the store and just buy a bag and don't ask any questions, take the bag home and literally just follow the directions, I might get what I want, but I also might not. And I might not know if what I'm getting is what I'm supposed to get, because I will say, well, I follow the instructions, but my result looks very different from that person's result. Because oftentimes, when it comes to like knowledge, there are things that we still have not all sat down and transcribed what is in our brain about a thing. A lot of what we know about a thing remains up here, and we use it very, very, very quickly, almost in our processing sense, almost instantaneously to quickly make sense of things, to quickly say that's right or that's wrong, or that I should follow up on that. The brain is remarkable in that regard. And so, you know, some of the very, very, very advanced AIs are in the experimental space are doing that kind of work, but most of the things people are interacting with today are not doing that kind of work. And so, I always go back to a human experience. If I went and did something that I don't know anything about and assumed that I was right in what I got, that's a lot of ego. That's a lot of, maybe misplaced confidence. And so I'm better off asking, hey, I do want to do this myself, but you've done this a gazillion times. Can you give me like some quick pointers? And they'll almost always tell you. Like I do a lot of barbecuing and smoking. So I don't want to go spend hours in a forum asking everybody how they did a brisket, because I will get 150 answers. But if I ask questions around, hey, you know, some high level tips on how to make a brisket this big, or I've only got 10 hours instead of 20 hours, and the answer will be like, don't do it. But I'm getting sidetracked. My point is, go to the experts to at least understand what should the baseline be. And if you're the expert in your field, you can ask yourself, what should my baseline be? So I've known a lot about asking people to share stories. I know when they are getting to their truth and when they are sort of circling it but afraid to push in.
Mhm.
So that gives me an understanding of whether or not the content we're actually getting from our participants is meaningful. We do a lot of internal training to sort of assess the difference both with human and tech. Are these, when you see a story that doesn't have the ring of truth, there's usually a reason for it. And we had early experiences in that helped us build safeguards into our platform so that we could weed out bad stories, if you will, and focus on legitimate good stories from real people. But when it comes time to then prompting in analysis, I've learned that there are certain things that certain tools are good at and certain things are not. Synthesis is generally good. Synthesis with interpretation is where you have to be really, really involved. You have to be really clear in what you're prompting and why. And I will often write long form prompts offline and get my thinking really clear and get the sequence of my thinking really clear. And then I will load that prompt up as a document in addition to putting it into the chat so that it stores that prompt in the
Yeah.
memory and refers back to it. And so, and that way, I'm trying to be a little bit of a teacher. I'm trying to teach AI what I know about what I would have done without it. And I'm asking it to leverage it's really, really big, fast processing capability and my really, really specific knowledge about this thing. And that's what I think prompting should be about. Leverage what you already know, state that as your truth, and then be very clear about what's different about what you don't know and what you're looking to learn. And I think sometimes when you do that in subtle and not so subtle ways, it produces a better result.
Mhm. That process that you described of of composing that prompt, that was such a beautiful description, because that is the type of thinking, right? That is analysis, that is problem solving, that is going step by step. That is just such a beautiful process. And again, in my space as an educator, how do I get students to that process in an area where they still don't have the content knowledge?
Right.
So this is a novel environment. This is the first time I am learning about qualitative research, right? And so how do I provide the tools so they have, at least that baseline knowledge to move forward and use the different tools at their disposal effectively, responsibly, and, intelligently?
That's a great question. I mean, I can only share a little bit of my experience in that because while we don't, you know, in our current size and scale, we're not training new researchers. We're, you know, hiring and partnering with people like you who've already got plenty of expertise in qualitative research and therefore are just adapting their deep knowledge to maybe a tool or a technique. But there have been times where in our current team in operation, I'm also wanting to teach our it's not so much younger in age, maybe just newer to this process, trying to teach them a little bit as we go so that they're building at least generalist knowledge of why are we even doing it this way and how do we do it better and all of those things which are macro still influence the quality of our work because if I want to build our capacity and expand our ability, I want people who maybe don't know, haven't spent as much time as you have or I have perfecting the art of asking questions. I want to take them from I've never thought about how to ask a better question to I now understand some key principles because most people do well with principles. You can teach a lot through principles. And so we do that in this learning roadmap. And the learning roadmap is like a template. And
Mm,
so, if you hire or you bring in students who show a natural curiosity, I find that the biggest variable in all of this is not their technical skill set, it's not where they come from, it's not what education they've had, it's how active is their curiosity. Because if they are curious, they are already attuned to asking questions to the point where sometimes they're asking me questions. I'm like, all right, like, let's focus on this. But that's a good sign when they want
yes.
to ask questions about the process, when they want to ask questions about the template. Why did you frame it this way? Great. Because now you're asking me to tell you to vocalize what I took for granted, which was my knowledge and experience that framed that simple question in a template. And if you ask me why that question is there, that is you tapping into maybe it's only 5 or 10% of what I know, but that may be a huge difference for that person because before they asked that question, they didn't know anything about that question. And now they know a lot more. And so I think sometimes, we want people to all be genius level in a topic. Not everybody has to be genius level. Everybody needs to be curious because then we can translate those of us who do know more can translate a lot of it into those curious minds.
Mm.
I imagine that's a little bit of what you're doing in teaching.
James, thank you for what you just said. So you asked me earlier in our session, talk to me about the commonalities across what you teach. And what you just said helped me, like I felt something click in my brain. So thank you
Mm,
for that. 'Cause that's really the kernel of what I try to do across my classes, whether it's the well-being class, the qualitative class, social psychology. I am trying to cultivate curiosity.
yes.
That's what I'm trying. I'm trying to cultivate curiosity by contextualizing questions, right? That we're asked by contextualizing what we're learning, whether it's the well being, the social psychology, the qualitative. It's all about questioning and it's all about cultivating curiosity in a way that when we finish with the semester, we're not, and that's what I say at the end of my class. Okay, now that you're finished with my class, it's not just, we're done. I have my grade, I'm moving on from whatever I'm teaching. It's just the beginning of their
Yes.
journey. And
Yes.
if I have been a successful professor, what I have done is I have cultivated their curiosity enough in that area, that they will continue asking questions and continuing on what they have built in our, learned and built in our short 14 weeks together.
I love that so much. Cultivating curiosity. That's what you said, right?
I did.
Um,
You got me there.
no, because it makes me think that this is one of the reasons why I think we have so much alignment and synergy, because in a different way, I think what I'm trying to do with our participants, whether they're in a workshop or just working on our platform, I'm trying to get them to express their curiosity or stoke it or unlock it, because I do think when we become curious about our own lives, maybe we lead different lives. And I'm trying to help those leaders who see those people as their employees or their customers or their communities. I'm trying to get them to be curious about their lives, because maybe if they're more curious, they won't be as assumptive, and maybe they'll say, well, what do you actually need, instead of, I think you need this, am I right? Like that's a leading question. I believe this would help you, yes or no. Rate how much this will help you on a scale of 1 to 5. And the question is NA an option? Because that's not what I'm really looking for. And I think that you mentioned once or twice in our conversations that good questions lead to the land of beautiful answers. And I just want to bring it back to you and to that point, to kind of start to bring us to a close. When you think about curiosity, you think about good questions, you think about beautiful answers. What is all of that laddering us up to?
You just articulated a few of these points. I think as we go about our daily lives,
Yes.
we should be engaged in more active questioning and
Yes.
reflecting. You know, I scroll through social media and I'm like, oh, I need this. Wait, why do I need this? I didn't need this 5 minutes ago. It's
Yeah.
because someone's telling me I need this. So just this art of active questioning. So we not only learn about ourselves, we are more in tune, we are more mindful. That's a huge area of my education and what I teach is mindfulness,
Mm,
being aware of the present moment without judgment, right?
mm,
And so that's being curious about our own lives. So if you're feeling stressed or if you are feeling unwell, okay, let's question that. Let's have a curiosity about yourself. What am I going through? What am I thinking, feeling, doing? What can I think, feel, do to change this situation where I'm feeling unwell or I'm feeling stressed? So everything, it's everything from personal well-being to consumerism. And the final point that I want to get to, which we keep talking about, is this point of connection
yes.
with one another. Like if I'm reacting in a relational space in a certain way, if I'm feeling something, what's going on there? Let's interrogate this space, right? Of this person and what's going on in between. What's there? What's missing? Because of all of the research, and this is the big point I'm building to, of all of the well-being research that has been done over decades, what recent research and what recent leaders in the field are saying of well-being, what it comes down to. There's one thing that well-being comes down to. I mean, this is simplified, of course, but it's social connection. Social connection is the heart, right, of well-being, of social well-being, emotional well-being. It's the
I
heart.
love it. I love it. It is what you're pushing at. Oof, we got so much more to talk about in the coming days and weeks, because a lot of what we were learning through Seek and through our stories, let's say, we launched it in late 2022, so really 2023. We were getting a lot of stories that in that moment seemed to be reflecting um, deeper questions about trust, either higher levels of trust or absences of trust. It has shifted this year, the last 12 to 18 months. We're seeing more, the implications of what people are doing is really coming down to this question of connection and belonging. And we're not forcing it. It is really coming out of the range, a very diverse range of prompts, of extremely diverse range of projects and stories and people. And this thing that keeps rising to the top is, I feel like in our population, in our society, there is such a deep, wide, and profound need for social connection. It is almost now I have to worry about my own confirmation bias because now I see it everywhere. It's like, yes, I understand why this is becoming a bigger deal for so many people, because maybe for a couple of generations we've been deprioritizing it, and it's showing up in our structures and in our systems and our institutions. So I think even when you're asking about brand X or company Y or this issue in your community, I think so many people right now are dying to tell us what is really important to them. And I think when you talk about that in the context of mindfulness and connection, I think there's so much impact that you can create in that space. You're doing it in your students' lives. You're doing it with me by kind of opening my mind to like the why and the so what. And I think that is in fact a beautiful answer. So thank you for that. Really, really thank you.
Thank you.
Um, I think we're at about time, so let's wrap it up here. But I'll give you the final thought. Bring us home. Is there anything you want folks who are watching this or listening this to reflect on as they don't do this at the end of our video? What do you want them to think about?
Well, first, James, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I always love our conversations, so
Me too.
thank you. And I just encourage people, let's cultivate curiosity in our own lives, right? Let's cultivate curiosity of our experiences, of our relationships. Let's learn to ask, like, as I said, worst question, the one that's not asked.
Mm,
So let's start asking questions, and let's start asking questions of ourselves, of our reactions, of our moments, and use that to cultivate curiosity in our lives, in our relationships, and to work toward those stronger connections and more meaningful connections and understandings of experiences and beautiful answers, as you said.
so
So thank you.
thank you so much. For those of you who are watching or listening, you'll find all of our links so you can get in touch with Christy or me, wherever you're watching this video. And thanks for tuning in and being part of our conversation. Have a great day.